It's a great pleasure to be here. If I project my voice and try to keep it at this level, can you all hear me at the back? Okay, so if you can't hear me, either wave and say can't hear you, or move forward. The choice is yours. I am in Helsinki. Yesterday I was in Stockholm, and tomorrow I go back to England, and it's a great pleasure for me to make my first trip to both countries and to meet in person people from Uranstrat, if I said that as well as I can, and with Animalia today. And I hope that you find my presentation interesting. I do not know Finnish, and I apologize for the fact that I do not know Finnish. I will speak in English. If I speak too quickly, or if I use words which you are unfamiliar with, will you please say so, speak up, ask me to stop and explain what word I've used. This did happen yesterday, and I was quite happy that the person did ask me to explain what the word was, and I now can't remember what the word was anyway. So with no further ado, I'm going to get going, and let's hope that this works. So the focus of my presentation is on my work in animal rights, which Philip so wonderfully described just now. And the book Growl has two narrative arcs. It is a memoir of my involvement and how I get involved with animal rights issues. It's also a manifesto. So the talk is structured around these two things, and at the end I've got some big questions that I want to pose to you and have you think about, and hopefully there will be time for questions and answers afterwards. So as these things happen with presentations, the R has dropped down. It should say memoir up there. And by way of introduction, these are a selection of the organisations which I am currently involved with or used to be involved with. And I'll just start from this side, the left side. The Animals Agenda magazine was a magazine I edited in the United States in the 1990s, early 2000s. And this cover is an illustration by the artist Sue Coe. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but we published her in the magazine. Is anyone familiar with Sue Coe, artist? A couple of hands. So we did a feature article about the debate within animal rights and abortion. So we had two pieces where someone said there was a link between animal rights and abortion, and someone had put the counterpoint of view. On the far right-hand side, Port and Down, that's a poster that we produced in the early 1980s with the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. We did a demonstration against the government's warfare research laboratory, which had about 6,000 people on it. Below that is the PETA logo. I was the first executive director of PETA from 1987 to 1992. To its left is Compassion World Farming, which was the first organisation I was involved with in 1976 to 1978. And I'm now involved with them today as a consultant to the chief executive. Above that is a group in America called Alley Cat Allies, who are also another organisation I'm involved with. And they work on outdoor feral cat, community cat issues, which is something that I've been learning a great deal about and can talk at length about. It's a fascinating, disturbing subject. More cats are killed in America by the 5,000 plus some local animal control shelter systems, humane societies, than anywhere else. And that's something that we're tackling. And then the logo above is Minding Animals International. This is a group I volunteer for. And what we do, every 3 years, we organize an international conference for animal advocates, opinion formers, decision makers, but principally also academics involved with the social sciences and humanities in a field of work called human animal studies or animal studies, and also known as, or part of it's known as critical animal studies. And this is the study of our relationship with animals and their relationship with us. So you can see there's quite a broad cross-section of activities that I'm involved with and have been involved with. And I'm not really going to return specifically to any one of these, but what I want to focus upon next is the manifesto side of the presentation, which is what I've learned from spending the last 40 years working full-time in animal rights. And when you write a book, it really does force you to clarify your own thinking about what's going on in your turbulent mind as to why do animals matter to me so much. And I came to the conclusion that there are 4 key values in animal rights. And you can see them up there: compassion, truth, non-violence, and justice. And I'll spend a little bit of time looking at each one of those. And for me, these 4 key values are at the heart and soul of what it means to care deeply about animals. And I try to make sure that everything that I say, do, and work for animals is grounded in those 4 key values. So we'll take each one in turn and look at them. So the first one is compassion. And the reason why I chose compassion is because I didn't feel pity for animals, which to me was a sort of condescending emotion toward others. I certainly had welcome.
Thank you, apologies, sorry.
Your apologies are accepted. I didn't feel pity toward animals. That wasn't what was my emotion that I felt about them. It felt condescending to feel pity toward others. I certainly had sympathy for them, but it was more than that. I certainly had empathy for them in the sense that I could relate to the feelings of animals and others, but what I felt I was feeling was compassion. And compassion was the connection to the feelings of others and being compelled to act as a result of that feeling of compassion. So compassion for me is when I look at a photograph of an animal or some representation of animals being abused, or people, not everyone, but some people, I feel compelled to feel compassionate towards their plight, but I feel compelled to do something about it. So compassion more than pity, sympathy, or empathy, for me is the overriding emotion that I have in these 4 key values. Compassion for animals. And looking back over my life, I tried to figure out what was it that brought this concern for animals out. And this is a photograph of a woman called Kate Ward. She was known as Camberley Kate. Camberley is the name of the town that I was born and raised in. I had a very ordinary, there's nothing special in any way in my circumstances, in my parents, in my life. It was very ordinary. And but we lived in Camberley, and I remember as a 5, 6, 7-year-old watching this woman push that wooden cart with all those dogs inside and tied to the cart up the main street of Camberley against the one-way traffic. And she terrified me, quite honestly. I never spoke to her, I never had any direct dealings with her, but I would wonder, why does someone do this? And looking back, I think that what she did, not that I thought she obviously didn't have any idea that she had done this, but what she did is put a seed of thought in my heart and mind about why do people care about others? You know, what makes this extraordinary woman, who's very ordinary in many respects, what makes her do this extraordinary thing in taking in all these dogs and devote her life and her modest savings, a modest life to all these dogs? Now, nowadays we might look at her and think, she's a bit of a collector, you know, are those dogs all well cared for? But I do know, when I researched this, that she had a very strong relationship with a veterinarian who donated a lot of time to help her. So I think that all the dogs were really well cared for, and she was a feisty character. And I sort of think now that she's a sort of formative animal rights person. She really campaigned for those dogs and cared for them. She did have, there are other photographs of her, and there's, I don't have it here, but there's a rather nice one of her sitting in a chair with dogs all around her, and on the armchair on one of the arms is a very ferocious looking cat who matches her. And the cat probably thinks, what are all these dogs doing here, you know? Anyway, so she, I think, placed a seed of compassion in me, and I want to recognize her for that. So the next key value is truth, which is our ethical relations with animals. Truth is because we need to tell the truth about our relations with animals, and our relations with them should be grounded in an ethical foundation. Now the next slide is the only gory slide that I'm going to show you, but there is a reason why I do this. And where I was confronted with learning the truth about our relationship with animals was when I was a student and I worked one summer in a chicken slaughterhouse. And that's not me, there is a photograph to represent this. But I worked on the post-slaughter part of the production line. I couldn't bring myself to go and see the animals, the chickens being hung up live and being killed. I knew it was going on. It was in another part of the slaughterhouse plant. I could certainly smell it. And the chickens had been killed. They'd been all cleaned out, and they came along a conveyor belt, and my job was to take a chicken and drop it into a plastic bag, seal it, and then put it on a trolley, a cart, which then took them into a freezer to freeze them. And I did that for about 6 weeks as a student. I didn't have any money, I had to have a summer job, and that was the job that I ended up doing. But the key point here is that where I was confronted with the truth about our relationship with animals is that when I went back to college after this summer, in the college was the only student I knew. Her name was Mandy, and I couldn't wait to try and wind Mandy up and make her angry and sort of show off this big machismo thing that I'd done in the summer, killing the chickens, working in a chicken slaughterhouse. And she argued with me and challenged my thinking. And over a period of time, she actually convinced me to go vegetarian. So I became vegetarian directly as a result of this, through Mandy's arguing with me, and became a vegetarian at the beginning of 1974. And I still had time to do on my college course. I was learning how to run hotels and restaurants, which included cooking. And she was doing the same course as me. And I said, well, you're vegetarian, how are you coping with cooking all this meat and you were supposed to taste it and eat it? And she said, well, I fake it. I bring the spoon with a bit of sauce, for example, right up to my mouth and pretend that I've tasted it, and then I put it right back again. And she didn't taste it. And that's what I had to do for the remaining 6 months of the course, faked it. And I really admire Mandy. I did reconnect with her when I was writing the book. She's in Australia, and she's still involved with catering, but not, it's on the vegetarian side of things, I'm very pleased to say. So this is about our truth in our relationship with animals. And what I'd like to relate to the issue about truth is spend a little bit of time talking about the philosophy of animal ethics. And there are different philosophical traditions and how they interpret our relations with animals. And I'd like to spend a few minutes looking at each one. I'm a great believer in understanding the philosophy that goes on with animal ethics and understanding our relationship with them. So just want to check in with all of you right now. Are you all okay with how it's going so far? Some nodding heads here, I see. Can you hear me at the back all right still? Good. So I'm going to look at each one of these of utilitarianism, natural rights, and ecofeminism. And the first thing I'm going to ask is, can someone give me what they understand what utilitarianism means? Can I ask for someone to say what they understand utilitarianism to mean? Now, when I gave this talk in Stockholm yesterday, they all leaped up and said, I know what's... So, I need... Yes, please, go ahead.
It serves a purpose to humans.
Say it again, please.
It serves some purpose or use to humans.
Serve some purpose or use to humans, okay. Anyone else want to offer a definition of what utilitarianism means? Go ahead, please.
In a way, kind of minimizing pain. Or
minimizing pain, yes. Go ahead, please.
That word reminds me of the French word utiliser, which means to use. So I'm afraid it has got something to do with
Its use is part of it. Well, what we probably, all of us, probably make utilitarian decisions nearly all the time without consciously knowing that we're doing it. A utilitarian decision is saying, is it better for me to do this rather than that? Is there going to be greater benefit from me taking this action rather than that action? I mean, that's a way of thinking about utilitarianism, is what does one do in order to get the greater good for the greatest number? There are various schools within utilitarianism, but that's essentially what it's about. And the primary book about utilitarianism and animal ethics is Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. This is the original cover when it was published in '75, I think it was, in the USA. And so, as you can read there, if a being suffers, there can be no moral justification for refusing to take that suffering into consideration. So what Singer is saying is that if we recognize that animals are sentient beings, which I think that most people do nowadays, that we've got to take their suffering into account. So when we make a decision about something, we've got to take the animal's suffering into account, because whatever action we choose to do, we have to take the impact that it has on animals into account. So, for example, is it right that I have a few moments of gustatory, momentary pleasure from eating a piece of meat which has come from an animal who has been imprisoned in a broiler farm for 49, 50 days, for example? Are those few moments of pleasure that I might get from eating a piece of chicken justified by keeping that chicken in those conditions for that period of time? And the answer would be no. I would say the answer is no. So that's a decision whereby I can't justify the pain imposed upon the chicken for the few minutes of pleasure it might give me from eating the bird's flesh. So that's utilitarianism. And then natural rights is the followed on from Peter Singer. This is the book, The Case for Animal Rights by Tom Reagan, that was published in 1983. And he did two things. He critiqued utilitarianism, and he also put forward the case for rights for animals. So he said that utilitarianism is not enough to guarantee protection for animals. He says that it's arbitrary whether we decide or not to decide to include animals and their suffering in our decision making. Because the animals suffer, we don't have to include their suffering into account. We can say that humans are more important and animals are secondary, and therefore I'm not going to take animal suffering into account. And Reagan says that's not enough. That's not enough protection for animals. He says what we need to do is this. He says that if, again, recognizing that animals are sentient beings, that their sentiency means that they are subjects of a life. That's the phrase he uses, subjects of a life. So in the sense that each one of us here are individual sentient beings, and we're all humans here, we're also all animals, but we're also humans, but we are, each of us, are subjects of a life. So my rights don't trump any of your rights, and none of your rights trump my rights. So Reagan says, if animals have sentiency, like we have sentiency, then they are subjects of a life as we are subjects of life, and therefore animals have rights because they are subjects of a right. Subjects of a life. It is inherent that animals have rights, inasmuch that humans have rights. And he says the most fundamental right that animals have is the right to respect or respectful treatment. So we have this evolution of thinking of going on with utilitarianism, and then it being challenged and critiqued by rights. And then there's a third form of animal ethics that I want to focus upon, which also has its own argument, but also critiques utilitarianism and natural rights. So is anyone willing to venture what they understand by what ecofeminism means?
Well, I don't know if I really know and understand what it means, but the first time I heard about it was in some ecological economics course that I had, and it was basically about how it was about like cows exploitation, and it was about like cattle exploitation, and specifically about the milk industry. That like the first woman to bring this to discussion, she realized that all the cows in the milk industry were women, and after that she felt like a huge compassion, and it just started a discussion.
Okay, that is very relevant, very interesting. And anyone else want to say something about ecofeminism? Let me just repeat very quickly what you said. Was basically the realization of a relationship between cows who are used to produce milk and the fact that they're all female cows.
Yes, and also, sorry, yeah, another thing came to my mind, also that once I saw a very interesting cartoon that was that compared the exploitation of animals in general with exploitation, or I wouldn't say exploitation necessarily, but the lack of rights of women, and that's how the similar battles in different times of history would become really comparable.
Okay. A link between the rights of, or the condition of animals and the rights and conditions of women. Well, basically, ecofeminism, thank you for that, that's very helpful. Ecofeminism, as the name suggests, is a bringing together of ecological thinking and feminism. And ecofeminism basically critiques the two preceding ethics that we looked at, of utilitarianism and natural rights, by saying those two are essentially extension of bestowing upon others the rights that men gave themselves initially. So ecofeminism says it's nothing about this patriarchal offering to others. What it is that we are all interrelated, that we're all equal in consideration, and that there is no separation between us. And the reverse of that is that there is what they call an intersection of oppression, which is that you cannot separate out animal cruelty and exploitation from mistreatment of people, women, children, and the environment. That they're all interrelated. And I think we know that from the fact that when we choose animals to make food, that not only is it an ethical issue as far as taking the life of the animal, but also it's a big impact upon the environment, it's a big impact upon feeding the world's population of people and so on. So ecofeminism is a way of thinking that shows a web, an interweaving of issues. And the reverse of that is recognizing that there is an intersection of oppression. Now, these three forms of animal ethics are important, I think, and I've gone through them really quickly, and there's a lot more to be said about each one, which you may be pleased to know that I'm now not going to do. It's important to understand them because they help to clarify our own thinking, or at least that's what they do for me. I'm not a philosopher, I'm not a lawyer, I'm just a angry animal rights person who's been very fortunate to spend his life being able to do this work. But I force myself to read the philosophy because it helps me to understand what's going on in my scrambled brain up here. It helps me to make sense of what it is that I'm actually thinking. And there's something really liberating about reading something that someone's written and thinking, that's what I think, but I've never been able to articulate it for myself. So I encourage you all to spend some time in learning about animal ethics and these different philosophical points of view. I'm sure Anna Malia can help you with things to suggest to read. And a little self-education, I think, is a wonderful thing. And it's important because you become better animal advocates as a result of it. So the third key value that I want to talk about is non-violence and our values in the relations we have with animals. And when I think about the relationship we have with animals when we exploit them, it's essentially violent behavior. We don't see it as violent behavior. We don't look at a piece of meat ordinarily on a plate or available to buy in a shop, or products tested on animals on a shelf in a shop, or looking at a carriage horse taking a carriage through the streets of a city. We don't normally think of that as violent behavior, but in my mind I think that is violent behavior. And we are a social justice movement which is challenging the violence that we do to animals, and as a strategic approach I think we can only end violence with non-violence. And that leads me to the fourth key value of justice. And I want to quickly talk about justice in three aspects of it. We are a social justice movement, and with justice, it's the issue of equality. So here I'm saying to ensure that the law recognizes animals like humans as sentient beings in their own right in order for them to receive the due legal protection. Justice is all about fairness, to require the law to protect animals appropriate to their needs as subjects of a life with inherent rights. And then lastly is a matter of duty to insist that individuals in society respect and enforce justice for animals. So my four key values are compassion, truth, non-violence, and justice. And as I say, they are the foundation to everything that I try to do as an animal rights advocate. But who are we as animal advocates? And here I want to spend a little bit of time talking about us. Well, I say us, I'm assuming here we're all animal advocates. Maybe you're not, and we'll find out maybe if you're not. But anyway, let me stop that line of thought. What I want to do is talk about caring sleuths.
What is sleuth?
Sleuth is a detective. Sleuthing is to detect. So caring sleuths is a concept written by a colleague, Ken Shapiro, and he talks about caring sleuths as being a combination of, on the one hand, and these are the examples that he has, of Sherlock Holmes. Everyone knows who Sherlock Holmes is, the Victorian British great master detective, whose recent TV adaptations you probably had here in Finland. On the one hand, a detective, a great detective, but on the other hand, someone who exemplifies compassion. And the example that Ken Shapiro gives is of Mother Teresa. Now, we might have issues about Mother Teresa on various grounds, but what he's trying to say here is we've got this sleuthing, this detecting work, and compassion, which we talked about earlier. And he says there's 5 aspects of us thinking about ourselves as caring sleuths. And I think why this helps me, and I hopefully will help you, is it tries to make sense of understanding who we are. So the first of these is caring. Statement of the obvious, we care deeply about animals. Not everyone cares deeply about animals, but we do. And in that caring, we see the animal suffering. And I think before we started to care, we may not have been able to see the animal suffering. The animal suffering was perhaps there, but it was invisible to us. But now that we care and we are awakened to it, we actually see the animal suffering. And in seeing the suffering, we now begin to actually seek it out. We actually look for it. We can't help ourselves but do this. And the best example that I give, for me anyway, is the sense that if I'm driving a car down a road, I always know that part of my mind is thinking, okay, what's going to happen if a dog suddenly runs out in front of the car? Am I going to be able to stop? That's where there's probably, thankfully, touch wood, it hasn't happened, but I'm imagining seeking it out, that I think it could happen, and I want to be ready for it. So we care, we see this suffering that was previously hidden, and we seek it out. We look for it. It could be as of standing in a supermarket shelf looking at a product to buy. Does it have animal ingredients? Was it tested on animals? And all this seeking, seeing, caring, if we begin to embody it, we literally feel it, and we can look at images of animal cruelty and exploitation and put ourselves immediately into the place of knowing what that animal is experiencing. Or if we live with animals, if we share our homes with animals, we have this intuitive knowledge of knowing, exactly what's going on in, my dog's mind or in my cat's mind or whomever. Does this resonate with you? Is this something that you also feel? A few nodding heads there. And this separates us out from most people whose connection to animals is much more limited as we perhaps once were. And because we want now people to see what we now see, we want people to feel what we now feel, it inevitably leads to tensions and conflicts. We see, perhaps there's people who are close to us in our lives, we see them behaving in ways that we wish that they wouldn't do because it involves animal abuse. And even though we know they know about it, they still do it, and that provokes tensions and conflicts. In Growl, I talk about how when I first became a vegetarian, I was living at home, and I was quite a know-it-all child who thought had answers to everything and was quite arrogant. And so I always thought my mum should be a vegetarian as soon as I knew I was going to be one. So we argued about it because I thought she should be one, and I knew she should be one. And she knew herself, but she couldn't do it for various reasons. So we would have bitter arguments about it at home when I was living at home. And we eventually had to call a truce and stop arguing about it, stop talking about it, because the atmosphere got so poisoned. And eventually, after some time went by, I started up again. I couldn't help myself. I was arguing with her about why isn't she a vegetarian. And she turned to me and said, "When was the last time you saw me eat meat?" And she had become a vegetarian, and I was too full of myself to actually notice that she'd become a vegetarian. And she wanted to see if I actually did notice, and of course I didn't. So I'm sure we've all got stories like this in our lives. So that's the tensions and conflicts. So that's caring sleuths. Do you think that maybe some of you, do you feel like as if you are a caring sleuth? Some nods, I heard a yes. Well then, to confuse you even more, I'm going to talk about 3 other types of animal advocates put forward by Tom Reagan in his book Empty Cages. And he talks about Da Vincians, Damascans, and muddlers. And Da Vincians are animal advocates or people born with a special connection with animals. They somehow or another came into this world with some special connection with animals. Certainly wasn't me. I had no special connection with animals. But I have met people who feel that they are that way. Then he says there's also Damascans. You're probably familiar with the road to Damascus, where people had a transformative moment that change their worldview, and then lastly, muddlers, people who sort of grow into animal consciousness step by step. I think I'm certainly not a Da Vincian. I probably had a few Damascus moments along the way, but I think I'm very much a muddler over the years, and I still do learn yet more ways in which we abuse animals. So I'm very much a muddler. So I think that understanding these ideas help us to make sense of a sense of who we are and why we care deeply about animals. Where does this all lead us in caring deeply about animals? Well, I speak for myself when I say that often I get really fed up. I hate people. I hate the world. I'd like to put an end to it all because there's so much suffering, so much misery. I end up going into what I call the misanthropic bunker. It's a place I go into where I am delusioned, I'm fed up, I'm angry, not making progress. You know, why can't X person or X organization learn a simple lesson, etc. And this slide, it's not me actually walking down into my misanthropic bunker. This does not exist under my house in England. It's just a representation of it. But it's a place that I've come to accept that I go to. And when I go to it, I let myself sit in the misanthropic bunker for a while. I try to get myself out of it, but I don't ever do any activism from when I'm in the misanthropic bunker, because I'm in such a negative space. I know that whatever I do in that space is not going to be positive in any way, shape or form. I might have a rant at my partner, who's very understanding and is one of us, and we might have a big complaining session together. I might go out and have a drink or go for a walk, or read a book that's completely unrelated to animal rights. But I know that periodically I get into this place, I let myself get into it, but I also know how to get myself out of it. And in a way it's quite therapeutic to get into the misanthropic bunker in a self-conscious way, not be apologetic about it, or not be embarrassed by it, but just think it's natural. You know, we live in a world whereby there are some truly wonderful, inspiring people and organizations caring deeply, doing magnificent work for animals, but there's also a hell of a lot of people who don't give a damn, and they actively abuse animals, and you know, how can one have any feelings towards them other than hatred? But if we're full of hate, all we'll do is propagate hate. We have to stop the hatred by an antidote to it. So that's the misanthropic bunker. Do any of you go in the misanthropic bunker? Yes. Oh, that's the strongest reaction I've had this evening. I wonder why. So when you go into the misanthropic bunker now, you can have ways to get out of it. Give yourself a treat. Get yourself out of it, but don't do anything from the misanthropic bunker. So now I want to show, coming round towards the end of the talk, and I want to talk about witnessing for animals, because I think one of the functions that we do as animal rights advocates is that we act as a witness for the animals. And there's various ways that I think that we do this, and these slides are going to show a couple of examples of how various people witness for the animals. And here, this is an open rescue, which is a strategy that I really like. I'm far too pathetic of a person to have the courage to go in and do it, but I do admire greatly the people who do. But they go in, they don't cover who they are, they go in as they are, they document animal cruelty and exploitation, and they bring that evidence out to show to their communities, to the world at large. And that's a form of witnessing for the animals, of being an animal witness. And I feel very, very much in support of that activity. Another way that we act as a witness for animals is through our protests and our actions. And this is one that was developed by Animal Equality in Spain. And when I first saw this image, I was very moved by it. And I still get quite emotional when I think about it and look at the image. What's happening here is there's a formation of people. Have you seen this before? No. One person's put their hand up. There's a formation of people in a massive public space in Madrid, I think this is. And each person is holding a dead animal that the organization has collected up from various sources. It's a very respectful, silent protest whereby the crowd around, can see this almost reflecting back to society our use of animals. I find this a profoundly moving image, and I think that I've never actually seen it in person. I've never done it, but I hope one day I will. And I know it's been now done in other countries, but as a form of action, I think it has all the hallmarks of what our action should be about, which is that the focus is on the animals, it's not on us. It's on the number of animals used, it's also on the individual animals, because they've got different animals. They do get the animals from various sources. Of course, none of the animals have been killed purposefully for the demonstration. They collect the animals up and keep them frozen over a period of time until they have enough. And I find this a great way to illustrate what I mean when I talk about witnessing for animals. But we also have other ways in which we witness for the animals, and that's very much the animals who we share in our lives. And here I want to spend a couple of slides just talking about the animals who we share our lives with. Here you can see over a period of time, as I've aged over the decades, these are some of the dogs and cats who we have shared our lives with. Sadly, none of them are alive now, but they all have their individuality, their story, and I'm very much a servant to their needs. And just to tell you about each one, the top left here is Booba. Booba was actually the first dog I ever had, Chihuahua, and I really liked him, and people said that he was a good fit for me because he bit everyone. And if I was a Peter at this time, and if people wanted to see me in my office, they had to call in advance, wait outside. I'd pick Booba up, I'd open the door, let them come in, sit down on the chair, and then I could put Booba on the floor. If anyone walked into the office, Booba would be underneath my desk and rush out and bite them on the ankle. So I had to take various precautions and instructions, and he liked everyone to be present. And I would have this joke about how I eventually called him Zen Master Booba because he liked everyone in a constant state of being. He never liked arriving or leaving. And then to your right of Booba is Bambino, the blonde, or Vino as we called him, or Annabelle, the dark one, or Piggy, because she was very greedy. And these two came with this one. Honey was, the three came together as a group. Honey weighed about 4 pounds. I don't know what that is in kilos, I still think in pounds. What's 4 pounds in kilos? This is a test. Quick.
Nobody's asking me, I still think in pounds.
And what's it kilo?
1.5 kilos.
How many?
1.5
1.5 kilos
Yeah.
is 4 pounds. So she was very small. I would hold her like this, as I am there. We could never buy, she had no body fat, no hair. She always looked old, but she lived with us for about 10 years or so. Coats were made from sleeves of sweatshirts where we cut the sleeve out, make 2 little holes for her feet to go through. She was very attached to me, as you can tell from that picture. This is Emmy. We had cats. And then the one on the right there is Shelley, who very sadly died last year. So when you go online and you look at animal rights work, very often all the images are of people with their cats and dogs and other companion animals, or it's pictures of food. lots of vegan dishes, or it's pictures of animal abuse or protests. There's always this sort of constant carousel of one of those four things: food, people and their animals they share their lives with, or protesting, or pictures of animal cruelty. It's a bizarre sort of combination of things that we keep seeing, or I keep seeing on the internet. And because I think we have these relationships with the animals in our lives, I like to make the point that we are truly animal lovers. Now, in Britain, if you say you're an animal lover, it's got fairly negative, condescending sort of subtext to it. Now, I said this point yesterday in Stockholm, and they said we don't have that same view of animal lover. It doesn't have that same negativity. Do you think they were right? Is it the same here? When you say animal lover, do you say animal lover in Finland?
It's more like an animal friend, maybe.
Animal friend, okay.
I would say, excuse me, I would say I'm from Portugal, and in Portugal if you say that you are an animal lover, it means you love cats and dogs.
Yes, that's very much how it is in Britain. And it's a slight pejorative, it's a bit of a put down if you said that to an animal rights person. Well, I actually think that we need to reclaim animal lover and put an animal rights definition onto it. Because I think at heart we truly are passionate animal lovers. So they're all going to disappear. And so they are cats and dogs, some of them that my partner and I have had in our lives. We don't have anyone at the moment because our lives are pretty busy with a lot of travel and we just can't cope with it. But my partner Gary and I went to Paris earlier this week. So what do two vegan gay men do when they go to Paris? They go to a pet cemetery. And this is another example that I've added into this presentation because this is another way of witnessing for animals. And this is the entrance of the pet cemetery in Paris. So these are just some of the photographs I took. Wonderful statue of an old man with a dog that was commemorating something which I couldn't really understand because it was in French. I don't know French very well. This is a cutout of an animal, of a cat's head. This was a mausoleum for a cat, but someone had put in a blanket and a cushion in there for either any, I know we didn't see any cats, but I have been told cats do live there. But a cat would live there. But this was the most provocative, most gut-wrenching for me. This says Ari, A-R-R-Y, and this is a plastic ball of all the tennis balls that Ari used to play with. And I thought that was just a wonderful way to witness animals. And pet cemeteries are fantastic places. They're really moving experiences, and some of the stones and the way the animals are remembered are a bit kitschy, they're a bit sort of got plastic flowers and plastic models of cats and dogs, which are fine, but some of them are really simplistic and very powerful. Okay, so get rid of that. So, coming to a conclusion before some big questions, I've spoken this evening about compassion, truth, non-violence, and justice. That these are my 4 key values. I'm asking you to consider them. I'm asking you, challenging you, to think about what your 4 key values, or however many number of key values you want to have. You don't have to have mine just because they're mine. You can, you should have your own. You can disagree with what I've got here. But this is my conclusion after 40 years of work for animals. This is, for me, what it is all about. But I want to talk now briefly about the animal rights movement as a total, and lead into that by looking at what is the opposite of my 4 key values. And the opposite of compassion, truth, non-violence, justice is indifference, lies, violence, and injustice. And when I realized this, I thought the opposite of my 4 key values very much represents how I see what we call the animal industrial complex, which is that mass of corporations and governments and institutions and practices and traditions which subjugate animals to be instrumentally used by us. We're indifferent to their situation. We lie to ourselves about how we use them. Our behaviour towards them is violent, and it's an injustice that we treat them in this way. So, in talking about the animal rights movement and social justice generally, one of the things I've come to conclude from doing all this work is that there are 5 stages of social justice. And I always start out with a bit of an apology here by saying this is a simplistic, schematic concept of a very complicated thing. And simplistic, schematic structures are problematic always, I recognise that. But I found this to be really helpful to me and my work. And the way that I see it is that there are 5 stages which social justice issues and social justice movements go through. And I'm not suggesting that it's easily, readily, sequentially from 1 to 5. Sometimes issues start in the 3rd stage of legislation or in enforcement, and they jump back, they jump forward. They might stop for a long period of time in 1. They might expand to 1 and 2, but not go to 3. So I ask you to think about this with that sort of caveat that I've added. So what are the 5 stages? The 5 stages are public education. So this is where we begin with the process of people becoming enlightened, learning about the issue. This is when we learn about animal exploitation and we decide to take action about it. We decide to live differently, to no longer buy one set of products, but to buy another set of products. And as more and more people do that, and as they get more and more organized, it trips the next stage of public policy. So this is where society begins to become sympathetic to the issue. So this is, for example, situations where a company decides to no longer test its products on animals, or another company might decide that it will no longer imprison chickens to produce eggs, or it could be that a university commits itself to always offer vegetarian, vegan alternatives in its cafeterias for students every day. It's where the institutions that make up society begin to adopt pro-animal policies. And this builds a momentum, a movement, and it leads to legislation where laws are passed. At the moment, much of the laws that are written for animals are not written by the likes of you and me. They are written and they come from the animal industrial complex, the organizations, the businesses which exploit animals. They are very much the gatekeeper about legislation to do with animals at the moment. They want legislation to protect their interests so that they can continue to exploit animals without trouble from the likes of you and me. So the 3rd stage is legislation, and where we need to get pro-animal laws passed. The 4th stage is the enforcement of that legislation. Its implementation. There's no point in passing good laws for animals if they have no mechanism for effective enforcement. And then the 5th stage is that you reach a sort of critical mass where generally everyone goes around saying, well, didn't we always think about this way? Didn't we always think that animals had rights in some kind? Well, we didn't actually. And I think that if you can think about other social justice issues in our lifetime, they have gone through those 5 stages to some degree or another. The line from left to right indicates is that as we move and expand our activities, and you don't jump from 1 to 2 and not do 1 anymore, we have to keep active in each one as we progress along them. But the issue starts from having minimum influence to public acceptance where it has maximum influence. In other words, the more that we're able to put into legislation and be enforced, the more robust the social justice issue is in being able to fight against those who do not wish to see it succeed. As social justice progresses through each stage, its influence and resistance to setbacks increase proportionately. So we spend a lot of time in public education, appealing to the public, making animal rights fashionable, but you know, the whims of people they're quite capricious. They change their minds. Something that can be fashionable one moment is not fashionable the next. Things go circularly. But if we can move it along so that we embed the values of animal rights into public policy and legislation, it's much more difficult to undo those things. Does that make sense? Good, thank you. So the question I ask is, are we a moral crusade or a social movement? And is animal rights firstly the duty of the individual? Well, yes it is. It is the duty of the individual. But I think that if we think that it's only the duty of the individual, then we're never going to achieve what we want to achieve, because frankly, not everyone is going to care about animals in the same way that we do. I think that's just a harsh reality that we have to accept. It's one that I've had to accept. And one of the reasons why I say this is because when I think about people involved with animals, we have the personal transformative moment, which I touched briefly upon when I talked about who we are as caring sleuths, or as Da Vincians, Damascans, or muddlers. And if you think back over your lives, you probably had personal transformative moments where the veil of secrecy about animal exploitation was lifted. Whether you wanted it lifted in front of you or not, it happened. So for me, it was working in the chicken slaughterhouse, it was having an argument with Mandy afterwards that led me to become a vegetarian. It could be that you watched a video online, or you've had a friend talk to you about the food that you're eating. It could be watching a program on television, reading a book, or some connection that you've had either with the animal that who you share your home with, or you've seen some horrific situation where animal cruelty has occurred, and it's so resonated with you that it's compelled you to change and make a difference. They are all personal transformative moments. And because we have them, I think that we very much think that if only we could get everyone else to also have personal transformative moments, we are going to win the fight for animal rights. And I wish that were true, but I've had to reluctantly accept, partly because I've had to spend time in the misanthropic bunker, that not everyone is going to have personal transformative moments. Not everyone is going to have the same passion that we have for animals, which is why we have to ask the question, is animal rights the responsibility of society? And I think clearly, for me, the answer is. It's more than just the responsibility of individuals. And because it's the responsibility of society, we have to make animal rights a mainstream political issue. And coming back to the 5 stages of social justice in this chart, and the line should appear, there it goes. So when we act as a moral crusade, I believe we are really at our most minimum influence. But when we act as a social movement and we're in the mainstream political arena, we are at our maximum influence. So I think this tells me we've got a lot still to do. Now, I don't make this point to make us all feel depressed and rush home to our misanthropic bunker, but to say that we should be realistic and that we need to learn how we make social change happen. Very sadly, we're not taught it in schools. We should be. And I want to recognize Jurensdracht, who I'm sure I probably said the name really badly, but also Animalia. This is the only example I've got where, and I know the conversation that Mai and I were having at lunchtime, have I said your name correctly?
Yes.
Apologies if I haven't. But we already are engaged with political action for animals. My point is that I want to highlight it, and I want to say we need to do much more of it. So then, this is the conclusion. What I've done, hopefully not too long, is look at my life in animal rights, the 4 key values in animal rights, and I hope you found this educational and informal and inspiring, and happy to sign any books that you would like to buy of Growl, or be around for the rest of this evening to answer any questions. If you want to stay in touch with me, I have my own social media. So there's my website, kimstallwood.com. You can email me at kim@kimstallwood.com. I'm Grumpy Vegan on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you will see a lot of complaining, but you also see a lot of photographs of food and other things. And then I have a Facebook page, which is slid off the bottom of this slide. So with that, I want to thank you very much for your patience, and I think we have some time to have questions, and thank you very much for being such a patient audience.
Well, thank you for a very interesting talk, and I can assure you I've lived here a few years. Behind the inscrutable masks and silence, there are lots of deep-thinking people here. So now it's up to you to prove it by asking very intelligent questions.
Well, I could ask one question. Personally, I've been, let's say I'll say it in English, but I've been in a big kind of fight in my head on the last years of my life. And of course, I think that everybody who is in this kind of fight or whatever is posed many questions, and many questions that sometimes you just don't know how to answer. You don't know the answer for yourself, and I guess that this is probably, I mean, probably for some people this doesn't make sense, but for me, at a certain point, the discovery of this magazine, some scientific magazine, that plants are sensitive. They actually react to touch and to blah blah. How this really kind of disturbed, let's say. How do you deal with this, let's say, or how your manifesto?
Well, I like plants too, I admit to drawing a line between plants and animals. Animals clearly have the capacity to suffer, and they're physically equipped, as we all are, to have that ability to suffer, and we take that suffering into account. They're also subjects of life, etc., etc. I would also argue, rather sort of, I'm trying to think of the right word here, and I can't think what it is, but I think if someone challenges me, well, don't you care about plants? And I would say, well, I do care about plants, and the reason why I'm vegan is because I want to eat as few plants as possible. If you eat animals, you eat more plants, because those animals are eating plants, and that you in turn are going to eat through their flesh. So, shut up talking to me about plants. You've got no grounds to do so. I actually also do get upset about the environment, and I feel angry about it, and I take great pleasure in being in environments which I think are beautiful, where the plants are living and are very much a part of it. When we were in Paris, for example, we walked along the disused metro line that's on a bridge, and it's now a park that runs for 2 or 3 miles, and it's spectacular, and it's quite beautiful, and it's to me, very vegan experience of being able to do that.
Yes, I understand.
I hope I've answered your question.
Yes.
I think your social development model, the social change model, is very interesting. So I was wondering, I think we're still probably in the public education stage, at least here in Finland, probably also elsewhere pretty much. So what would be your advice for us as an animal rights movement? How can we move to the policy development stage?
Well, I think first off is to really recognise and understand that is where we're at. and to be subconsciously aware of it, because with that recognition, it then means that you then have a mindset to think about, okay, well, what do we do about it? Which, in a way, is the question that you're asking. So, one practical way I would say is that whenever you do any action for animals as an organisation, always think, what is the public policy political component to that action? Really, I now say quite strongly that we shouldn't really do anything for animals unless it also has some political consequence directly. Now, I say that, but I will then readily admit sometimes it's a bit hard to do it. But I think that by forcing ourselves to think like that, we then begin to think, okay, what is the political consequences of this? So if you're out tabling, having a booth somewhere, you know, clearly you want to have some way of saying to people, have you contacted your elected representative? I mean, that's fairly traditional. But if you're having a campaign, where you're having a campaign to, let's think of an example now. You have campaigns against fur. I know it's one of the priority issues for Animalia. If you only were, and I know this isn't true, but if you were only having campaigns against fur, which was just public education, street protests, then I would say you need to up the game, up the ante, and have some political component to it, which could be, how can we make it more difficult for fur farmers to do what they do politically? How can we change the law? Can we find out if they've got tax subsidies from governments that we could challenge and withdraw so that they aren't so underwritten by government at our expense? That to me is the political side to it. So to help move the issue along those stages and expand into those other stages is to think about, when you have an objective, a strategy, is to identify in that objective what is the public education component, what's the public policy component, what is the law component, what is the political component, and have developed strategies with all those three pieces in it. I think we tend to think in terms, mostly but not always, of just the public educational side piece. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Well, I have another one. How do you see the role? There is a new party or upcoming party, animal rights party, a political movement here in Finland. They haven't quite collected the 5,000 names yet, but I think they will by the next parliamentary election. So how do you see the role of such one-issue political parties?
This question always gets me into a lot of trouble because my answer is that I don't actually agree with that as a strategy. I'm never going to try and persuade someone to not do it. It's certainly something that I wouldn't do, and it's not something I would advocate doing. And the reason why I say that is because, did everyone hear the question, by the way? Not really? The question was, what do I think about political parties for animals? So the party for the animals, for example. The reason why I don't agree with them is this, is twofold. Firstly, however hard you try not to do this, I think it has within the political world, it has it creates the impression of ghettoizing the issue of animal rights, of trivializing the issue of animal rights, and the treatment of animals. That's a problem, I think. So the other reason why I think the way I do is because what are we actually seeking to accomplish fundamentally? And I didn't really tease this point out, but for me, if I could achieve one thing, what it would be to get a political party who has an understanding of animal rights and a commitment to take radical action for animals, who has a chance of being elected and getting them elected to form a government. So that when they go into power as a government, they come ready-made, as it were, with an agenda of issues to do for animals and an awareness of the animal issue that is sympathetic. And the smaller minority parties, generally speaking, are not going to form governments. Now, I know there are exceptions to the rule where the coalitions occur, but basically I think it's far more productive to work within the major mainstream political parties, regardless of what their ideologies are, and work within them to get them committed to animal issues, so that when they form governments, they actually are empowered to do something about it. And we're not constantly in this sort of state of, why won't the government do something? Well, the reason why the government won't do something is because we haven't really worked within the political parties to get the political parties to have policies on animals and have commitments to implement things if they get elected to form governments.
Can I just ask you quickly about that? Do you think that's partly influenced by being a British person, where here it is actually possible for some minority parties to have influence because of the British political system? It isn't.
You're quite right to point out that in the British Parliament we don't have proportional representation, and basically governments are formed by one of two major political parties, and we have one Green MP who has a seat in Parliament because the Green Party flooded her constituency and worked hard to get her elected. And I'm very aware of the fact that what you're saying is true, which is that minority parties can have knock-on effects on major political parties. And there's a positive way of saying that the various, in the Netherlands, I know that the Animal Party there has had a big impact, and I salute them for that. But that still doesn't take away my other point. And also, I would say that in Britain, and this may be too British politics talk for this audience, but we have a situation where we have the European Union referendum in Britain, and in part that has been caused by a really minority party scaring Britain about the EU. And it's a party that has really no power, has had much greater power than it ought to have or does have, has caused this crisis in our country. And that's, for me, another reason why I'm someone who prefers major mainstream political parties rather than minority parties.
I have a question about, like, what is your experience with the relationship with other people, like, during your way with this work? Do you feel like it's been a burden in some relationships, or I feel like I'm struggling with this at the moment, so it would be interesting to hear how you talk about it, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. I think we probably all know what you mean and have experienced it. Absolutely, I've lost people because I have fundamental disagreements with them, and I regret that I don't have relationships with them, friendships with them, but I don't want to. You know, however important they may have been, if they're so hostile to what to me is so fundamental to why I think it's important to live, then I just don't want to have anything to do with them, and I just essentially cut them off. We touched upon this when I talked about the Karen Sleuth and the Da Vincians and Damascans and Muddlers, particularly the Karen Sleuth. It does cause tensions and conflicts. So I have cut people off because I can no longer deal with them because they're so fundamentally in opposition to everything that I feel is important. But also I have very good relationships with others who don't probably go 3/4 of the way with me. They don't quite make the final quarter. If I go around to their homes and have dinner with them, they will always cook vegan meals for me, always. And they know to do this. But they can't quite give up meat themselves. And it's a big issue. And I don't like it, but I have to have some give and take. And I can't live in a world, I could not live in a world, and I don't think I would want to live in a world where I'm only dealing with people who share our beliefs. and I've had places where I've worked with lots of animal rights people and socialised with lots of animal rights people, and after a while, you know, they might be comfortable, but it's actually, you're not really engaging directly with the rest of the world. Does that answer your question for you?
Yeah.
I think you need to hold true to your values, never apologise, but be sensitive to who you're dealing with and how you interact and how you communicate with them. And the story with my mother, I mean, it's completely true. You know, I had no idea she'd become vegetarian. And that's a very good example of what not to do.
I have a question that links a little bit to her question. It's a very personal one. I have teenagers, 15 and 16, and well, I raised them vegetarian. And then about 16 months ago, I turned vegan, finally, like 100%. And a few months after that, my 16-year-old started eating meat. And just anybody, any hints, what can I do?
Next question, I think. What can you do? You know, they're an adult. They know what they're doing, and it's that awful rebellious age that we all have to go through, and it's a big learning curve. You know, let them get on with it. And I think if you can do this though. You can say, I don't know what your situation is in your home, but in our home, meat is verboten. It will not be allowed into our house. There is one exception. My partner's 95-year-old grandmother, who's this big and eats virtually nothing. We will let her bring in a little bit of meat when she comes home. And the cats and dogs when we've had them. Some of the dogs have been vegetarian. But no one else is allowed to bring meat into our house. It's absolutely, and also cheese as well, milk. So you can impose those sorts of rules if they still live with you at home, if you run a vegetarian or vegan house.
I have a little grandmother as well, which is my daughter's girlfriend, who can eat meat because her condition, she has to eat meat. So whenever she comes to visit, we have the house.
Yeah, that's another issue, and I was talking about this with someone else last night about, there's someone I know who's a good friend, and he took the photograph. He's a great photographer, he took that photograph, and I'm actually wearing the same jacket, I realised earlier. And that's in my office, by the way. I do not have a chicken factory cage in my office, but I have bookcases like that. It's my other old office. And he says he needs to eat meat, and he's a great guy, he's a very compassionate man, he's very talented. Very artistic, and his wife is also very similarly so. She loves to eat meat and won't stop, but he doesn't want to do it. But he's explained to me that he has a medical condition, that if he doesn't eat meat, he actually gets ill, and he has to eat a little bit of meat every now and then. And I go, no, I don't know about that. But I'm not a doctor, and I can't really, you know.
Yeah, he's in a wheelchair, and he really is.
Yeah.
So
95-year-old grandmothers, they're a real pain.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think we'll have to wind it up now, otherwise we'll all be driven out at 7 o'clock. So could we just show our appreciation again for Kim's talk?